Oh, no.
Hello.
Three topics we're going to talk through today. First, I'm calling this meeting to order. Present, I have myself, Councillor Shoup, and Councillor Cushing is online. Item number 3 is approval of minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Any discussion? Nope. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. All right, next is we have 3 topics we're going to get through. So we're going to try and use this first hour to focus on the first topic. So just to set the stage, we set a council goal this year that we wanted to try and prioritize our major capital improvement projects. And so At our last meeting, we asked staff to come forward with just a couple scenarios to get the conversation started. So I view today as kind of a first of what will probably be multiple conversations to try and figure out and answer a couple questions of one, like what can we afford and when? What does that mean in terms of our financial health? And then eventually, I think it's important that we engage more broadly with the public on rough timing and prioritization and what the public feels like they can afford. So I don't think we're here necessarily to decide what happens when. I think today is really about doing some modeling, having discussions, seeing what that means financially, and then eventually having a conversation with the public around priorities and timing. Just for everyone's awareness, we do have a Counselor Corner Live scheduled on October 30th, where we want to continue this conversation more broadly with the public, share some of the conversation that likely has happened here, and use that forum as another opportunity to get input, feedback, so that we can continue down this path and figure out, you know, with some of these major needs, when they could happen, what the costs are going to be, and what that means from a tax impact. So with that, I want staff to kind of walk through the scenarios that they did and the modeling so that we can just understand what was done. And then I invite other people in the audience from the school, the library, the community center, the committee as well, if you have questions, comments, things that you would like us to consider as we continue to work through this modeling exercise. So I'll pass it off to.
Yeah, I'll just provide a couple of introductory comments. At the last finance committee meeting, you tasked staff with coming up with two scenarios. Those both included slight variations, but important variations nonetheless, for the a school solution coming forward and the community center. And so we've provided that. That's the material that was in the packet. Today, though, we have added in a scenario that includes the library, and we'd like to share those documents and have that the subject of discussion tonight, if you don't mind. So I think that's what's being shared now. Yeah, Nick Cloutier, assessor, I think you've come to appreciate, has a certain set of skills, shall we say? And he and Norm combined, I think, make a pretty effective team. So they have really gotten deep under the hood, if you will, of John Cloutier's debt model, which is something that we all were quite involved with kind of in the formative stages. They have updated it to include up-to-date budget figures. Nick has included all the updated assessment evaluation information and kind of run that forward. So with that quick introduction, I'll leave it to these gentlemen to walk you through the model, the quick overview of assumptions and what it produced.
You want me to lead on?
Can I make some opening comments?
Of course.
Just starting with the table there on the cost of things, 105, we talked about that at the last meeting as kind of the midpoint of the range on what the school committee is looking at. And as we discussed last time, we expect the borrowing on that to come in 3 tranches. So it's spread out over 3 years. So that's consistent with the last meeting. The community center, when it was presented in the workshop, it was in the 82 million if we go now. So for this scenario, it's like a year out. So it's inflated for the time value of waiting before we start that process. And then on the library expansion, Chip has informed us that they're looking at the range of 22 to 25 million. We went with the high side just to be conservative, and they've committed to raising 20% of that cost in private donations. So the borrowing that we put in the model is 10 million a year over that construction cycle. So that's kind of where we're starting from on the scenarios, and take it away.
Nice. Yeah, those are the big points. Even before that, just wanted to point out that you had asked us to do 2 primary things, kind of simplify it to the priority of the town's financial health, which is one of the things we can look at, and then also the impact to the taxpayer, as simple as how many more dollars will a tax bill go up when we estimate the cost the years out, to a little bit more fine tuning of all the financials combined. What is it looking like for year over year tax impact? And we've modeled that in here too. So in this there's two scenarios, 1A and and then 2A. And then they're color coded, so we know which one we're talking about. But the first one, the 1, is pink, and that outlines that the school and community center are coming on next year with the ballot, and then it takes a year or two for the actual, debt to start accumulating. We'll show that later. And with the library going on the 2028 ballot and then starting the debt service the year after. The difference with the scenario below in the green is the school stays the same, library stays the same, but the community center in this scenario doesn't start until the ballot of 2029. And then it's got its first debt service payments in fiscal year 30 and then thereafter.
And you'll note we've escalated the estimated construction cost commensurately with the delay.
And that's based on what Todd Souza told us about, an estimate of perhaps 4% a year for a good estimate of what it would cost more the longer you wait. So if we go to the next page, these are some of the assumptions, mostly that were inherited from the prior procedures with former Councilor Clucci's work on the debt model. Do you want to speak to any of these?
Go right ahead. Yeah.
We thought that they were valid and still reliable. Of course, they're estimates, so the longer and farther out that they play out, they may need to be revisited and maybe less valuable, but for the short term, they feel like very insightful. And they're when we had to make a judgment call that wasn't, very obvious. We tried to be conservative, but base it on prior years' data, not just out of nowhere. So some of this is from industry standards of what you might expect for the increase in time value of money or borrowing standards. But some of them were also vetted through staff, like what we might consider each revaluation year of property townwide to increase the valuation, or historically, what would the net budget go up aside from capital cost for operating each year. So we used historic data that we inherited from the model to make sure that was still the case, and we changed it if it wasn't with actuals.
Just notably, there's two things I want to make sure everyone's aware. This model assumes annual budget growth, so our cost of doing what we do last year are going to go up. The model right now is built between now and 2030 for budgets to increase by 4.9%, which we think is probably too healthy, but nonetheless, let's be conservative where we should be. Thereafter, it grows by a factor of 4.4%. Again, I think we get good historical data to suggest that's a good number. Similarly, on the valuation side, we see ourselves in a bit of a growth spurt, if you will, from a valuation point of view, particularly with the Downs project being in its the height of the project in many respects. So we're showing a year-over-year growth in our valuation of 2% between now and 2030, and then it falls back to 1.5, and we've got decades of data that suggests that that's a very solid number. And lastly, we're carrying annual typical CIP borrowing of $5 million each year over year. So point of this is we tried to be all-inclusive to make sure we're understanding all the different elements, and these are really critical factors when it comes down to kind of what it does for overall debt service and also what it does to taxpayers and their tax bills.
And of note that 5 million per year CIP is above and beyond these larger items that we're isolating here. It doesn't include, it's above and beyond the school, community center, library.
Last thing is that we have accounted for net present value, kind of the time value of money. And these gentlemen can speak to that if you wish, but that's built in as one of the assumptions.
And just so everyone knows, obviously there's some usable model online that doesn't necessarily reflect this anymore, and we'll work on getting that up to speed once we've had discussions of what you'd like to see. But if we go to the next page, we can start on this. And this first gets at that metric of financial health. It's not necessarily the most important. There are other financial health metrics for, debt rating and bond rating agencies, but this is just one that we had readily available to compute from the model. And this shows the debt service as a percentage of the prior year operating budget. And I believe anecdotally, a target goal in the past has been below 15%. And you can see that in both scenarios, it does increase above that in the heaviest early borrowing years of both scenarios, whether or not the community center is later, because that's the difference between the two scenarios. It's a matter of when and to what extent that occurs. In terms of whether or not that metric is something we should be concerned with, can you speak to that?
That metric is important when we go to the rating agencies for rating on our bonds for our new debt issues. So they would definitely look at the high years and put a sharp pencil to that, and it would probably be somewhat credit negative to us, but we've got other factors that would potentially override that for the total.
I would suggest that the more practical use of this metric is that we found that if we are able to, well, let me say this, annual debt service cost is one of our single largest expenses. And when there are fluctuations up and down, not surprisingly, a large cost up or down can affect tax rate. And so
Yeah.
we found to the extent that we can smooth this out and have kind of level set in terms of our operating expense, it has, we can minimize or blunt the effect on tax rate swings up and down.
Yeah, even in these two scenarios, you can see the difference that perhaps in the pink column, scenario one, where more things are coming on at the same exact time early, there are more years where it's above that 50% in a row, versus if you go to the other scenario, not only are there fewer years that are much higher above it, but it also is smooths out more because one of the projects was weighted for a little bit.
Yeah, and keep in mind with all of this, this is a kind of a fairly surgical, but it's also blunt in that when we would go to borrow, there's all sorts of very particular decisions that will be made in terms of how many tranches, whether it's interest only, principal only. So these numbers, we have some ability to affect and smooth things out. And you really can't do it with much accuracy now, but when it comes down to it, we actually know what we need when we need it. We're able to do some things that will ideally smooth out some of these peaks in particular.
So relative to the other metrics that rating agencies would look at, my assumption is this metric around debt service as a percent of expenditures is probably the most impacted by this, whereas some of the other ones might change, but because
Yeah.
we're looking at things like overall valuation, like it's not going to be significant and move us down, but going to the 15% mark does put us in the elevated category, it looks like,
But
whereas right now we're in the moderate.
Tom's comment is very, very on point in that.
Thank you.
That doesn't happen, oh no.
Shocking.
It built into these assumptions is the debt service is level principal.
Mhm.
So obviously your debt service annually is going to be front loaded because you're paying interest on the higher balances up front. And as you pay down principal, your interest cost declines. So you can, exactly as he says, you can shift that debt service by shifting to level debt service where you pay the same amount every year, kind of like your home mortgage, where you make the same payment over 30 years and you're paying interest up front and principal in the back. So there's ways to massage the debt service to impact the debt service percentage.
How does it work with impact fees, and how does that impact this? Because if my assumption for at least the school and perhaps the community center, there will be an impact fee associated with it. So would that impact this? when we're
It
using-
doesn't impact these two columns presented. What it does is gives us a revenue source for the debt service. So your calculation of debt service as a percent of revenues is benefits from that.
And also you'll see the benefit of non-property tax revenues like impact fees and the impact of taxpayers. But the percentages of debt service costs as a percentage of operating budget won't change. It is what it is. It's just how we pay for it.
Yeah. The mill rate.
If we move on to the next slide or page. So this is getting at that second metric, the tax impact estimations for how it could affect a homeowner, let's say. And I used the current median assessed value of 600,000 in these scenarios, but on future pages, you could see different subsets or breakdowns of that. And also the details will be shown on the following pages, but this is just the high level overview of each scenario side by side. So on the left, it's the estimated total taxes. And you could, go across, in a given year and see the differences of what this person that has a $600,000 assessed value home would be estimated to pay based on the model. And that's assuming their assessed value goes up every reval year as well. Perhaps easier to look at the differences between is the other side, the year-over-year tax change. So you can see in a given year, the differences you might experience. So if you go down to, let's say, 2030, when more things are online, you could see the difference year over year. In scenario one would be 3 versus it'd be 6.68 in that scenario, because that scenario in 2, the new debt service is coming on. So it's got a higher amount that year than, for example, 2027 scenario 1 is notably higher because that's the scenario where both the school and community center are coming on at the same exact time. So it just shows you, and it's all about, as you said, prioritizing. And in these scenarios, if nothing were to change from the model, you might have a couple high years, higher than expected, to see coming in advance and perhaps prepare for, or make decisions to change that if you want big CIP projects to come on at different times or make different operating decisions. You see in still on the right side, year over year tax change, there is a difference with the smoothing effect though, of scenario 1 with everything coming on earlier. You have a couple of years of 8% in a row year over year change, which is, notably higher than the goal of 3% or less that has been historically. But if you go over to the green side, even though it comes on later, the increase, it's, 5, 4, 6. It's not the 8.5. And that's mostly because the communities that are coming on a little later in that scenario. And I did want to point out a couple outliers, and it just gives further credibility to the way the model does think ahead. So if you go to 2040 in that column, someone that looks for outliers will say, why does the tax rate go down, or that person's taxes go down that year? And in real life, that's far out, it probably wouldn't, let's say. But the reason the model says that, there's a reason. So that is when the CEA payments to the Downs are estimated to go down because they've reached their maximum around year 20. And if that happens sooner, when they can only get $2 million a year versus once they've reached a certain maximum, that's when that occurs. And then one other anomaly that has a reason, if you go down to 2053, and obviously this is very far out in the future, but I just wanted to make sure that people understood there are reasons for these extremes in either direction. And if you scroll down, so it goes the next 3 years too, it goes from a pretty smooth 2.5% up to 5.55 for a couple of years in a row. And that is because that is when the downtown TIF ends. And it's projected that when the downtown TIF ends in 2049, that in this model, the state valuation would be affected 3 years after because the shelter benefit would go away and general purpose aid would thus go down about 4 million each year for 3 years until that smoothed out. This may not come to pass, but there's a reason for those two anomalies, TIF related things ending.
And do recall, this page is total taxable paid, so it's not isolating just the debt service costs. It's what we would expect a homeowner with a $600,000 value in this year would pay out over the next 30 years, full cost.
So, I will say I was not prepared tonight to have the library part of this presentation. So we were given updated numbers as I walked in here tonight. And I think I want to acknowledge that. I thought we were coming here tonight to talk about a school and a community center. And so I'm concerned that maybe now I understand library was part of it, but I don't think that was the instructions for tonight. And I'm concerned because I feel like this slide or maybe the next ones are really the ones that the residents are going to want to be looking at. But now we're talking about a scenario that I wasn't prepared to look at, and I'm concerned that these numbers are maybe different than what the packet had originally. So I think my question is, I mean, if we hadn't changed the scenario and put the library in, would we be looking at lower numbers for that?
They would be slightly lower, yes,
Yep.
and that can be reflected in the agenda materials. And to speak to the point, because I do want to be considerate to the fact that the agenda materials up were different. There was some dialogue about that. Do you want to speak to that,
Yeah,
Ron?
so we did get something in yesterday or today, and I asked to see if we could run it. And at first I didn't think it was possible. And so their staff was able to run it to see what it would look like. And again, this is an ongoing exercise, so we will have to at some point include the library in the conversation. So I'm sorry that it wasn't shared more publicly with you guys that it was included, but you know, it is a capital project that is on our radar that's over the $5 million in the next 20 years that we need to contend with. So it would go down, but again, I think that's where we have choices to make in terms of scenario 1A, scenario 1B may not be the one that we ultimately go with. It might be scenario 10,
Right.
10A that we ultimately come up with. And so tonight's just the start of the conversation.
I totally understand your point, Counselor. I think you'll see, and I'm pleased to provide, we've got the tables, you can look at them side by side. I think you'll see the same sort of general trends. The big takeaway for me is that generally we can afford this, which is a bit shocking, and we didn't believe it. But we've pressure tested this, looked at the anomalies, tried to understand, are we missing something? You know, at the end of the day, it's a model. But I think it does provide me some comfort that this is not unmanageable. Whether we can garner public support is another matter.
I think my takeaway from the original stuff, which I don't think changes with adding the library, was whether you look at scenario 1A or 2A, really the choice is, you know, you want a little bit more pain in a shorter period of time, or do you want to extend that over a longer period of time? And I think that's really a question for the public of which one is more tolerable, because while I think our fiscal health metrics give us an indication that we can afford it, I think for the public, it's going to be a different question of can they afford it? And again, I think that's where moving things, making choices is going to be where we need help from the public to understand what's important and what are they willing to afford. But I think it's also important to know what this looks like for what you were saying, Nick, of, well, if we know in 2027 and 2028, we decide to move the school and the community center forward and we're going to have 8% tax increases, that may require some tough conversations between the council and the school of, you know, do we need to do a hiring freeze that year to like try and mitigate the tax impact? Like we say a 4.9% increase, maybe that year we need to shoot for a 0% increase. So I think what this does is it allows us to look at the longer term to say, what choices should we be making? Do we need a 5 million? Do we want our CIP to go from 5 million every year to try and do 3 million every year? And we're just gonna have to work within that. Again, those are all the choices I think would have to be decided once we know what it is we want to do and how that's going to impact our financial future.
Yeah, and there will also be the possibility and considerations of how to best utilize the TIF captured funds leading up to and in those years to see if there's any creative way to make that ease this burden. On the next page.
Excuse me. Sorry if I ask a question or make
Go ahead. Sorry, Donna, I didn't see you.
That's all right. When we talk about affordability, we're discussing affordability for the town, meaning based on these scenarios, taxes we collect, we're going to stay within reasonable parameters for debt ratios, etc. It would be really interesting to me, and I think wish we'd spend more time on this going forward, is that we develop models that look at affordability for taxpayers based on what we know about incomes and growth in income and so forth. And it seems to me that, you know, taking that type of data out over a 10-year period would give us some interesting guidance with respect to using the term affordability. I note on here that these projections extend past my 100th birthday. That's in 2053, by the way, if you want to put it on your calendar. But, I think I am very mindful of the demographics of our town and the fact that we have potentially right now, 35, 40% who may be on fixed incomes. And so I think that when we do these kinds of models, we probably need to take into consideration what the purchaser of these services is going to experience. I'm not sophisticated enough to do that, but it seems like you own a $600,000 home. It sort of depends on who owns it, right? That if you're a recent retiree at 600,000 and you look at these numbers, you may feel entirely different than if you are a tech worker who just purchased your first home and you're starting a new family. So
I think that's really hard to try and model, only because I feel like at the end of the day, it's a judgment call based on you as an individual of what you're willing to pay, right? And so you might be in $1 million home making a lot of money, but don't want your taxes to go up. So again,
Well-
I think that's where it's really, we have to engage the public and understand what their willingness is to see their taxes go up, to understand, because that's the one piece that worries me, is that while we can afford it and it looks like fiscally it's not going to hurt us to do scenario 1A compared to scenario 2A, like it ultimately comes down, are people willing to really do what's on the next slide, which is showing, what that means for your tax bill.
Well, respectfully, John, I think that whenever we use the term, we should have two different terms because, is it fiscally responsible for the town? I think these numbers demonstrate that. Is it affordable to the town? Well, that's a question of, is it affordable to the taxpayer?
Yeah.
And a very simple metric is, what do these tax numbers represent as a percentage of the various income brackets in town? So again, you're absolutely right that one person may say, gee, I'm going to have to change my lifestyle in order to pay for this, but it's worth it. And another person may say, I don't think so. I mean, a part of the purpose of this discussion is to demonstrate to the people of this town who have expressed a concern about what they perceive to be as a rapid increase in the cost, that we are paying attention to that. And I think we made great strides in doing that in the last budget period, where we made some significant cuts to our original plans based on being sensitive to the revaluation. So that's that is my major point. Because if you're sitting in the cheap seats and you hear this word affordability, you could be scratching your head saying, I don't know what they're talking about. I know that may be a contrarian point of view, but I think I'm here to express those things. So enough from me. Thank you.
If we can go to the next page, one of the requests that I heard at the previous meeting and we tried to make happen was, what is the actual dollar amount per each of these things that is coming out of my pocket? In this scenario, once again, a house property, not only 600,000, but 400, 800,000. But the other part to the left, the larger breakdown, is per 100,000. So you could do the math for yourself, no matter what your property is assessed at. If it's a modest $100,000 manufactured home, or a more elaborate multi-million dollar property. And that breaks out for each of those elements per 100,000. And then you just multiply it by your property's assessed value to get the estimate of your tax contributions or requirements for said project in any given year. And the same is done for the other scenario later on. We can certainly come back to this, but I think there's some value in going to the next slide in the sake of time, and also what that slide shows, once again, this is the scenario 1A, so this is also done for the other scenario. But I thought it was interesting that the model shows the other big capital debt that's already on the books and when it comes off or when it's paid down. That's another thing that you can consider in your timing of when you might want to bring on a larger capital debt. And you could see some of the columns that went with school project, high school rental project, public safety building, as well as the lump sum of all prior non-major capital improvements lumped together, things already on the books that we're currently paying down. And you might be able to see, well, in 2035, we have things going down and one big project coming off the books. Maybe that's a good year to look for some other future plan, whether or not it's these projects. You want to speak to anything on this?
I think you covered it.
Okay.
Said exactly what I would say.
Sure. So it's not so much to tell you what to think about it. It's just information to help in the considerations. The fact that the current debt we hold as a town does go down over time and does go away over time helps you think about when taking on new debt might make the most sense. And if you continue to go to the next pages, these are just the same as aforementioned, but for the other scenario, when the community center comes on a number of years later. So it just smooths out when these impacts to property owners occur. And similarly, on the next page, it's the same breakdown of the current debt we hold, which is the same as the other slides, but the columns for the library, the school, and the community center. The community center is different in this scenario, that it's coming on later than in the other scenario. And it just shows you those same year-over-year tax changes that you had seen in the prior slides. And that's kind of the major breakdown that I wanted to share and we wanted to share about how the model interacted with the scenarios we were asked to provide for those major capital projects if they were to come on in the next few years. I think there's some other slides in the agenda packet that was about all the debt we currently have as well.
Yeah, I just included a real general amortization of all debt currently held right there, Liam. I don't know if you can enlarge that, but essentially we've got about $82 million in debt held with interest. That's about $104 million. And this is overly simplistic, but it shows you without the level of granularity that Nick just showed, kind of in big picture where our debt service is going to start to take, a step back. So you'll see debt service costs are just about 10 million right now. By 2030, it's going to be 8 million. So there's some room, if you will. And then just look further down that list, it drops off again, kind of around 2035 and so on and so forth. Again, this is just a data point, something to consider. And this information might inform how you want us to run the model again with maybe a longer timeline that is more particular. I think the scenarios were more our gut telling us how quickly we have to or we might want to do these projects. This sort of information might be another layer of information on top of that to say, yeah, we might, if we wait 3 more years, it really smooths things out a lot better. So by no means is this the end of the conversation. The model is quite simple in terms of changing dollar amounts if you wish, and certainly timing. And we can run, there's any number of permutations we can run if you wish.
And just to that point, changing the dollar amounts is incredibly easy and instantaneous. Changing when a given project comes on takes a little bit of manual maneuvering, so it's not quite plug and play in the moment.
So,
And just minor points, excuse me for a second. That this is a point in time, so this schedule doesn't consider any new CIP debt that we would do in the future. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's overly simplistic, but I think it just proves the point that you can see where we have capacity.
so Tom, if I understand correctly from comments earlier, that you would anticipate in real time, looking at our current circumstances and being able to move things around. I mean, you can't change what we owe now, but we can change whether or not we wanted to accelerate principal payments or, restructure a little bit how we did this. And I mention that because it seems like this modeling, which is excellent, by the way, tells us that we could proceed with these projects in a fiscally responsible way. And what I'm hearing you say is that once the voters say do it, then we have the ability to moderate costs during given periods of time. So my question really is, would there be value in doing many, many more scenarios, or would they just confuse people? Suffice it to say, I'm sure you could find one that doesn't work, and I'm sure you could find one that people would say, well, that's not very realistic. It's too rosy. This one strikes me as being pretty down the middle.
Yeah, Don, I would say, once we get the green light from the voters, I think we would then undertake the task of really understanding what's required to execute that project. And I think there is some flexibility in terms of how we structure that new debt, in terms of level P&I or some sort of, front-loaded, back-loaded. There's all sorts of scenarios there. There may be some limited opportunities for restructuring some of the debt that's shown on this page. Most of that opportunity we've already taken advantage of, or it's just not financially to our advantage to restructure it. We're already in such good terms. I think for me, the exercise that we are undertaking right now is helpful in kind of breaking what I've viewed for years as a bit of a logjam among staff and council and others, just feeling almost paralyzed that we've got all these massive, hugely expensive projects and don't see a way forward. And this gives me some level of comfort that we can actually, from the town's perspective, from a affordability, from the town's balance sheet, we can do this stuff all within the same 10 years, kind of take this debt on. You can shuffle them around, and it's up to you to prioritize which ones you want to go first. But I think that's a huge takeaway that should give everyone some comfort that it's not beyond our reach. Again, that's different from garnering public support. I think that's a different conversation for sure.
Any questions, comments from the committee before I ask others in the audience? Don?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that was my takeaway from this exercise, was that we can make this work in the next 10 years. The question is just when, right? And we could do it early, which could create, some near-term impact, or we could peanut butter spread it. And so I think that's just really the thing that the council and the community have to align on, is like, which is a better choice.
And caught up in this conversation is opinion, whether things are needs or wants, whether there are crises that require you to act and motivate voters to support. All of those things stand to upset the order and the priorities, perhaps. And some might argue that we've already delayed things to the point that we are in crisis situation. So it's not easy. It's complicated for sure. But I've heard from many of you, you are the gatekeepers. You decide not whether a matter goes forward, other than when it's ready for consideration by the voters. And to me, if I were sitting in your seat, this sort of information would be really important and helpful to understand. Is it time? Is it prudent? Am I doing my fiduciary responsibility by letting the voters decide this? And then they'll do what they do, obviously. But
I think that's my perspective about this, like the fact that the community center did their work, but the school has pretty much done their work, and I know the library's in process of advancing theirs. Like, I think this is just my personal opinion. I think I'm willing to make choices, but I do feel like it would be, I don't feel comfortable withholding something from voters, because it's ultimately their choice whether they want something. And if we put something too early because it's too early and they vote it down, like, I think that's important to give them the option to do that, though I will say I'm a little concerned about with the school, what does doing the community center earlier put on the school in terms of risk, because I see that as a real need. And so that's like the political, public opinion piece. Like I want to be sensitive to the fact that some people may support the community center and then may see the tax impact and then say, well, I don't know if I want to support the school anymore. And what's that risk? And that's the risk that
Sure.
concerns me, because I don't want.
I think it is your responsibility to make everyone aware of what's coming forward, and then helping understand maybe what that timeframe is. Because it's hard to ask someone to support something in isolation without even recognition that there are other large capital needs that we have and that will be coming on the heels of this this project.
You know, as I think of it, there is one scenario that, or a set of scenarios that might be beneficial for each of these projects, and the school in particular, that I recall in the survey, there were various price points, and I think that the 105 was a price point that you picked to model because it was kind of in the middle.
Yes.
But it would be interesting to kind of show, to bracket that a little bit more in one scenario without the other two things, and perhaps do it for the community center and the library. Mostly to gain an understanding of the tax impact and to give people maybe a better sense of what this affords. I mean, my worry with the school is that things always cost more than you think they're going to. And it might be helpful to kind of do a little sensitivity analysis around there. Now, that's just me. I'm not requesting that, but it seems like it would be useful if it wasn't hard to do.
Yeah, interestingly, on the school, that 105 was the result of a specific survey we did around the school.
Right.
And interestingly, that really speaks to maybe affordability is not the right way to characterize it, but the level of acceptance that voters said that they're willing to tolerate in terms of tax rate increase. So for the school project, we've got a interesting bit of additional insight in terms of what the voter is likely to support. Whereas the other ones, we don't necessarily have that level of understanding.
But if that comes in at like 120 in actuality.
Yeah.
I think is that what you're requesting, Don? Is it to see the school at 105 by itself, then maybe at like 140 by itself, to know what that looks like and how that impacts?
Right.
In isolation from the other projects. Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is that I would characterize this as kind of not worst case scenario. This is really front loading things sooner than I expect. Practically we'll be able to and want to bring them forward. It also doesn't assume any kind of collaboration, cooperation. We've talked a lot about the potential for some of what the library wants to do. Could it be done in the community center, vice versa? Does the school have opportunities to do some of the same? So there should be those discussions going forward, and I'd like to think that it produces some lower capital costs as a result.
Yeah. So I just want to see if any of our partners here have anything that they want to ask or share. So if you want to go up to the podium.
Just a couple of thoughts. The first is I wholeheartedly agree with Councilor Cushing. There is a difference between town financial responsibility and affordability. And when you're on the town's fiscally responsibility piece, I would be concerned if we're saying we can afford these projects. However, we have to consider freezing our employment. That to me suggests this is not fiscally responsible. We are running a school district where we know enrollment is increasing. We know that we have students with very specialized needs that live in Scarborough, and we don't know what's coming down the road. Those are positions we don't have the luxury of saying we'll just freeze. So I would suggest that perhaps needs a better look. Then you look at the affordability for the town. Councilor Cushing is absolutely right. That is asking the town, can you afford this increase? And my concern with putting that's where the larger talk of wants versus needs comes in, and what are we willing to put our money towards? If we are saying the school is in need, I am a little bit concerned that we don't put the school on the ballot first. Of course, I think, other groups are going to have differing opinions, but if the school is the need, and there is a very, very concerning piece of this, that if we go forward with the community center first, the tax increase and the tax impact is such that the school fails because people don't think they can afford both. And so I just ask you to keep that in mind as well.
Good points. Thanks.
Well, hello, everybody. Kate Bordeaux, president of the library, and I had not planned to speak, and I will not address the financial matters because that's not my wheelhouse. But John, you said something that maybe created the impression that the library was still trying to work out a program. That's not actually the case. We had a program that we brought to the voters, and we know the history of that. So that is in our pocket. What we're doing is analyzing what we need to do and how, and also as to Tom's point, what collaborative efforts can we have? What services that we provide are appropriately moved to other venues, which are not, which would be inappropriate. And to something else that Tom said, we're looking at this kind of flat. We are in crisis at the library. We have all the patients in the world, but our staff are pushed to the limit. Our child services are pushed to the limit. We do not have the room to the capacity to accommodate up to 120 middle schoolers every afternoon, 5 days a week, 9 months a year. So we have to be alert and really go for the long game, but know that we've got a short game on our hands as well. So when I've been writing to you saying we're kind of working on it, it really is trying to untangle the bit of a mess we're in to come up with various strategies, not just one strategy, because we need relief. Any questions of me? Nope. Okay.
I'll definitely follow up with Kate's. We are looking at just as you are exploring these scenarios. We're kind of octopi ourselves, and we're trying to get our tentacles out here and seeing where how can we bridge the gap to get us to that will get us in a good position until we get that permanent solution out there. We're looking at semi-permanent solutions. We're looking at temporary solutions. So we're looking at really ways to bridge the gap. We are annually, we're looking at 117,000 people visiting the library. So that's our actual foot traffic. And that's, I would say, what was it? That's at least triple what I was accustomed to in my previous library that had more square footage. So we have 12,000 square feet currently, 117,000 annual visitors last year. The year before that, 108,000 visitors. My previous library was 40,000 visitors at 14,000 square feet, and we still had an expansion to accommodate for that. So that kind of gives you a, just a scenario or a little bit of a glimpse into what the actual space, how cramped our space actually is. And if, we definitely are working to partner with community services. I think that we have a clientele after school that will still gravitate toward the library, but a sizable of that would gravitate toward the community services, which will be amazing. And it would definitely help us deal with that a little bit more. But if I do a high estimate of how many average students we get after class, it's about 100 students. Usually it's 80 students. I'll go up to 100 for the sake of ease of math. And 180 school days, that's 18,000 students. We're still at 100,000 other people who are coming into the library annually. So we do have a surge, which is a sizable surge, but we also do have a very steady stream of people who are not necessarily coming in after school. That is just kind of that is a literal straw that, well, not a literal straw, but that is your straw that broke the camel's back. That's, you know, it's a 20% surge, but it is a significant surge considering we would be already at capacity at 100,000 people. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of just a little bit of an insight, and you know, I can present more factoids in the coming months if you'd like. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Brian Shumway, I'm also Library Board of Trustees. I'll use that as your numbers, Chip, as a segue to talk about more numbers. And, you know, I really appreciate the scenario 2B that you got, you know, 2B that you considered tonight. And, you know, as I was seeing it, I thought that, you know, the splitting the $10 million issuance related to the library was a nice way, you know, to segue and sort of keep that debt issuance level. And maybe even pushing it a little bit earlier would be a way to, you know, keep the annual issuance at about 45 million to branch it into the community center. You know, and we've been talking about collaboration and the need for meeting space in town and other group space. And I think one of the things that we will likely find is, you know, there probably is some overlap between some of the projected uses of new space in town. And I think by building one of these smaller projects like the library, I think we'll both be able to have a small win for the town, sort of an easier win for council and for the public, be able to identify some areas that might not need to be duplicated, and hopefully, you know, either fight some of the cost inflation on that larger project, or maybe even reduce it. You know, the other thing that I think of is we talk about the notion of affordability, you know, not just growth in cost, but affordability in relation to income. And I think it's tempting to think about growth in income for our current set of residents that live in town. But it's a pretty long horizon that we're talking about with this cost of debt. And the residents that live here now aren't going to be the same residents that live here over that entire horizon. That's going to be influenced, you know, by in-migration. It's going to be influenced by death. And so I think we're likely to have, you know, a large, you know, increase in incomes that, you know, that'll go beyond that 2% that we might typically see for folks that are on a fixed income. So I think, you know, we need to think about those things and maybe think a little bit broader than is tempting to, as we think about affordability and growth rates. So thank you guys for the work you're doing. Thank you for, you know, inviting us and for involving the whole community in advance of, you know, the larger vote. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I meant to say thank you.
I did as well.
Thank you guys for coming. And I just want to be clear, I didn't actually mean we're gonna do hiring freezes. I was just meaning that, like, there's gonna have to be conversations specifically if we were to get to an 8%, if that's not tolerable, like, there's choices that are gonna have to get made and discussed. And so I think that's more for the council that year to figure out, like, are we gonna be okay with an 8%? Or if we know this now, how do we get the community prepared so that they're ready and know that it's coming? Because I think that way it's something that they could be prepared for. Karen, you had something you wanted to say?
Did everyone get to speak that wanted to speak? Okay. I think I just had some general feedback on the whole process. And so the big support of the schools, worked directly with the community center. Chip, I see you at the library like every week. So I just wanted to put that all out there before I give my personal opinion as a counselor who's only on for one more year. So keep that in mind. I have concerns because I understand that residents are comfortable with a $105 million school project. I don't see how that's possible when what was presented to me was the most fiscally responsible, and that was what people voted down last year. So I love the number 105. I just find it very unrealistic. I don't know how we could do any of the scenarios and keep it in there. So I think that just concerns me. I don't know how that's accurate, how we could try to present these numbers moving forward if we don't have the next proposal really. I understand, but I think maybe we should have gone a little higher. I don't know where that came from. Love the library. Didn't know you guys were going to be here today. I have a different perspective. I was not on the council when it got put on the ballot, but it was put on the ballot. Community center was not. So I have the opinion of, we put it out there, we took a chance, and people said, no. I have a lot of feelings about that. I really feel like the issues you're dealing with is our lack of community center. And I personally think we should maybe think about a teen center, because I have a teenager and I have a middle schooler, and I think what's going on there is not okay. But I think the way it was presented and the way we did it, it didn't work, because we're trying to solve for a bigger problem that we have in the town. And so I think that's a concern that I have. Finally, you were saying that, it's up to town council to take a position. I personally feel like we've already taken a position. We took the position to put the library on the ballot. We took the position, which I didn't agree with, to not move the community center forward. And we've made the school a priority. I can't imagine one counselor who doesn't say it's not a crisis. So I feel like the conversation today has been a little light, where this is our priority.
Yeah,
I
this
want a
was the
community
priority.
center so bad, okay? But when I worry about the residents of Scarborough and what people moving into this town, what their expectations were, people move to town and be like, you don't have a community center, and they get pissed. But they're not gonna be like, I'm out of here. I would be out of here if my kid was in a kindergarten class with 25 kids. And I think that's just my personal opinion. I think we need to really cognizant, recognize what this council has been saying for the last year, that this is a priority, this is a crisis. And I don't think 105 is even close. And so, I appreciate the exercise. I think it's helpful. I think it's good to see the numbers. I don't really agree with the way it was presented. I just one opinion.
Yeah.
And so I think it was really helpful, though, to have the spreadsheet of the debt service general obligation fund that you talked about at the end. Because I think that's something that is a good consideration when we talk about the timeline of
Mhm.
what we want to take on and bring on. But again, I think we have a screaming priority on our face that isn't 105 million.
We do, and I think we all agree. I think the question is, that's really the debate is, when is the community center? When is the library? That's the piece that I feel like we don't have an answer
I don't
for.
agree, but I feel like council has said that the school's a priority. And so I think that was the decision that was made when they came and gave a presentation. And then they said, instead of going to the ballot, you guys are going to finance.
Mhm.
Where the library came with their complete presentation and they went to the ballot. And I think
Mhm.
that was a choice. And so I think, good or bad, as much as I don't like it, I think we kind of acknowledge that the school is maybe a priority that we need to address. And I think that's where I go back to the library and I just say, I feel like a lot of the pain that they're feeling is because of a lack of a community center.
So are you saying you prefer scenario 2A at this point?
I guess.
Counselor Cushing, any thoughts from your perspective?
If I have to choose.
If you had to choose,
I just have an observation listening to the comments of my colleagues and the public, and that is, when we talk about a library and we talk about visits, a substantial portion of those visits are school kids. When we talk about a community center and we talk about what its function is, a substantial portion of that project are school kids. And yet we always talk about these things in isolation as if they were totally separate. And it seems to me, I don't know enough about it, but it feels to me like we have these conversations in silos and people think community center. I don't think they think of it necessarily as being a teen center or all of those other things. And I think that we need to start having a conversation about what do we need to do for the educational needs of the kids in our town. And then on top of that, what are the adult programs? And how do those things interact? Because if you vote no for a library, then you are in part getting rid of, you're not addressing what I have heard from you is an important need for after-school programs and the like. if you don't do a community center, I know we've lived with that for a long time, but the needs of our kids after school are changing and the need for facilities there are changing. So I just will make an observation that says that we look at these as if they are discrete things and and they are, to my mind, very much interrelated. And that's a conversation that feels to me like we need to have.
Great. All right, so we are gonna have that counselor corner on the 30th. This was really helpful conversation, and I would encourage everybody here to help us think about how we want to frame that, because I think Counselor Cushing, like you just said, you know, while we need to talk about what we can afford in timing, I think we really want to talk about, you know, what are the things we want in our community to keep it great. I think we all agree, or at least the council, your point has made it clear that the schools are the priority right now. But these other things also have benefits to our community that we also want to do, but we need to kind of, in my opinion, really understand the tolerance of the public to support these so that we can actually eventually have them all. And part of that is going to come down to timing. Great. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about TIFs and CEAs, which you all are welcome to stay in.
No numbers involved.
Yeah. I'm sorry for not letting you guys know. I should have sent you a note.
No, we tried that. We can do it again.
I don't.
So when I get it, I won't lose it. You never, please, you never know. I'm certainly going to do a deep dive.
All right, so moving on to next item. Discussion and action on the proposed changes to the CEA policy. So, Tom, do you want to set this one up?
Sure. Yeah, this was a council goal. I think the council's experienced 2 or 3 affordable housing CEA requests and have uncomfortably been tried to put them through an economic development CEA policy. They just don't fit. We know that. And that had been recognized for some years, frankly, as a weakness in the policy. So Karen has really taken on the task of working within the existing policy, but really creating a differentiation between economic development CEAs and affordable housing CEAs. And in doing so, has solicited input from this body, from her SETCO board, and also from the Housing Alliance. So the product that is in front of you that we're recommending for your consideration takes into account all of that input. I think she's provided kind of a consolidated summary of the input received to date. So we believe we've had a pretty thorough process. I think Karen wanted to touch on one thing in particular, just to highlight and make sure you appreciate. I think it's a great ad, but something we want to make sure you're directly aware of.
And one thing I wanted to make clear, it would have been helpful if I put in that green was the brand new information. The red was the part of the CEA that was already in there that we reviewed the previous time. So all the green edits are 90% of the green edits match those that feedback that I gave you.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to highlight one thing, particularly with respect to what the Housing Alliance told us. And the Housing Alliance was very concerned about not making people jump through a ton of hurdles. They wanted to make sure that it was easier or not difficult to get through the process for a housing project if they're really doing affordable housing. So one of the things, they suggested 2 major pieces. One piece was, hey, we don't really think it's helpful for us to be in a joint meeting with the council. We prefer going through the housing CEA within the context of our meeting and then joining, one person representing them at a housing workshop or a council workshop. The other piece that they wanted to do is they were thinking, does it really need to go to the finance committee? Can it really go directly to council with our recommendation? And part of the reason they wanted to do that, I think it is a little bit of timing. Like I mapped out the CEA process, like how long it's going to take. And as written, we're really talking almost 5 to 7 months to get through the process. And so if the housing recommendation went straight to the council and they decided either they're comfortable with it and they could start the process again, or they could start the normal process, that might slice some of this timing off. But I didn't put that in there because I wanted to make it replicate what we were already doing. So the only thing that I changed in here was the Housing Alliance meeting separately and not participating in a joint meeting other than giving them their recommendations. So that's just one piece. And again, it was all about the ease of making it really possible for folks to make it through on the Housing Alliance.
This is for the affordable housing CEA. For
Correct.
the current CEA, does that go to the finance committee?
An economic development.
Never did.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Part of the policy.
Okay, that's why I was
Yeah,
curious. is-
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're just sort of diverging on that. And I get it, the timing, listen, if you needed to get a CEA for a housing project that was going to Maine Housing, you really needed to start the year before.
Mhm.
And the reality is, we're talking very different in terms of
Right.
CEA obligation, because we're talking about for affordable housing, it's more per project.
Yes,
Whereas this could be a multi-million-dollar
exactly.
CEA. So I'm comfortable with that, because again, I also remember when we vote on the housing CEA, sometimes it's less about the financial and more about our values and
Right.
if this is important and aligned with our general growth and affordable housing strategy. So I'm personally okay with that. I'm interested to hear from the others if you're okay with, a slightly different process that seems to kind of bypass the finance committee and just go direct to council.
About this, I think about like the land bond and the process that people have to go through in the vetting. So I mean, I think it's depending on what does your Scarborough Housing Alliance Committee currently look like? Do they have the capacity to really vet this, which I think your current structure, it does for sure. And if we're being fiscally responsible in our due diligence, that's why I asked, do we do that with the regular CEA? Are we suddenly skipping a process to like push something along? And I think so. I don't know. I see the step in finance and why you want to do it, because I think it just brings more transparency to the whole project. And I mean, also you're using town funds, but we can do that through the Scarborough Housing Alliance. I don't see that's a problem.
There's certainly are financial aspects to affordable housing one. They're fairly simple and straightforward. I
Right.
don't think,
Yeah.
they really rise to the level that requires, direct finance committee involvement. I think the council itself, will make pretty quick work of understanding what the financial obligations are.
And they're still required to give the financial.
Exactly.
assessment
They,
as part of
nothing
the
else,
application.
they weren't streamlined on anything else. The other thing is, we can put in just a small clause that says, hey, the full council has the right to send it to finance committee. It's like, you know what, we're not comfortable with this and we're gonna go back and go through that process.
That's how I felt too, like, because I was a little worried about, I keep getting on the horse of like, I want more process. But again, I think if the council can always create more process, this is
Right.
the minimum process.
Their ability to do so.
Yeah. So that's where I have comfort in knowing this is pretty solid. It's just if the council ever decided to send it to the finance committee or to extend the public process or whatever they want to do, they have the prerogative to make that choice if they want to.
Always.
Okay.
I don't think it even needs to be in writing.
Yeah.
Right.
So the problem that we're trying to solve here is it doesn't go fast enough. And the way to go faster is to cut a step out. Is that basically what?
Well-
There's timing and also, I think just ease of the process. It was two things.
Yeah, it's
that
really
you
not
were
cutting a step
interested in.
out. It's not adding a step to affordable housing, which would require more time. Because the advisory group, presumably the experts in the field on this subject matter, I think purposely need to be part of this process and we've built them in. The question is whether you want to also include another step that goes to finance committee. So we're not cutting a step out, we're really just removing an additional step. Does that make any sense?
And the way I look at it is it's a unnecessary step given the scope. We're not
Fair
talking
enough.
apples to apples. For our 40-bedroom affordable housing unit is
Right.
different from developing 2,000
Yes.
units in a much bigger TIF district. And so that's where I think they're not apples to apples. So I don't see the
Sure.
need for the extra step unless the council decides they want an extra step.
And the accommodating factor that I did write in that wasn't in the feedback was I did say that if there needs to be a TIF created with the CEA, number one, the TIF is still in the council's bag, but that process can happen simultaneously. You can process both at the same time. So I did make that allowance just to make sure that was clear.
Any questions on the policy overall or any areas that you guys have questions for Karen or staff on? I only have one, so I'm gonna give you guys the opportunity, or I can ask mine. My question, Karen, it was on page 17 in the packet, parts 5D through F.
5.
Under terms of agreement,
Terms of agreement,
it
okay.
just read weird.
Mhm.
So I don't know if there was extra words that we needed to just strike.
Yeah, well, you know what, there was, thank you for calling that out. On item D, it says the partner will also,
Yeah.
you had a thought that didn't finish.
Yeah.
So that just needs to be deleted.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm.
Yes.
There wasn't a thought that
Yes.
was supposed to be added. So it's just minor, but other than that, I think it's great. Thank you for all the work on this.
So I will,
I don't know, Karen or Don, if there's, Don, any questions? Comments?
I think that the level of accountability that was discussed in our agenda packet, items 1 through 9, makes a lot of sense to me. I'm still not completely comfortable with cutting the finance committee or making the finance committee a step which is at the pleasure of the council for these projects. And I'm recalling the conversations that we had around 3i Home and the cost to serve and all of those kinds of things. And it seems to me that that those are real financial questions, even though it's a small thing. And then I think you're absolutely right, John. When it gets to the council, it's a values question. And one role the finance committee can say is that this is fiscally responsible. It fits with our budget and so forth. So we're not going to tell you you should like this particular project or not, but I think the role of the finance committee is to say, yeah, we can see how this fits in. Now, again, maybe I'm the minority opinion on that. Less bureaucracy I'm always a fan of, but I think that there are the perspectives, the hat that you wear in this committee, I believe, is a little different than the hat you wear when you sit as a counselor, when you have to consider, the larger elements of the issue. So it's just my 2 cents. On a scale of 1 to 10 of how strongly I feel about it, probably a 6. So.
I just want to clarify, all the financial analysis, cost to serve and all of that, they still have to do. We did not delete any of the analysis that we're requiring. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
I do have a question, because I was looking at the comments from the Housing Alliance, and they were saying they don't want to use a scoring form. If we're not going before the finance committee, so what's the scoring form?
So I think that was that included in their yeah, the original CEA that we were working with had a scoring sheet that helped you, the finance committee members would use to just sort of level set where they are in this process in terms of understanding, did they meet the objectives and all of that. And I forgot, I did make a change of that. The scoring was a 0 to 10. I narrowed that to 0 to 5 because I got to tell you from an analytical perspective, your 7 and your 8 is probably the same. So I just narrowed that 1 to 5 scale.
So if we eliminate the finance committee process, is there not going to be a scoring? So I feel like that's a level of transparency. We have a
Yeah.
committee, everyone, like, again, the land bond, we have a scoring process
Yep.
sheet you go through to justify why we're using these funds.
Yeah,
So what is that, is no one doing the scoring anymore? Is the Housing Alliance going to be doing the scoring?
They were not thrilled about doing scoring, but I think you could make that, you could put that on their side, do the scoring.
I guess I don't know what is it just them running numbers and saying, we think this is a good idea, where if we have a base of like, this is what we're scoring on, I feel like that's a very concrete thing.
So one of the things they said to us was, it made sense to them to do scoring if you're rating a bunch of applications together. If you're just analyzing one application, then the scoring didn't make as much sense to them. But I don't think they would say, no, we're not going to do this. If you want them to do the scoring.
I probably don't understand the scoring
Well, I think-
process as much.
I think what we've done historically with the Affordable Housing Committee is when we've gotten them, they did review it and then they would provide us a memo.
Yeah.
Providing their opinion. Again, I have comfort in the depth of the application that the council's gonna get all the details with expert review, with a memo that's gonna give good judgment on whether it's something we want to move forward or not. And again, it often comes down to financial impact versus values, especially for affordable housing. And so again, I think that's where I can say for myself, if it's a good project and it's gonna address our housing needs, I think what the council has the liberty to do, like we've done in the past, is maybe instead of doing a 15-year, we're gonna do a
Right.
10-year, and we're gonna do like I think there's prerogative. As we're talking though, I think I'm talking myself back into maybe just adding the finance committee as a step, just to make sure that it's given the proper diligence that Counselor Cushing said. You made me go from a 4 to a 6, Counselor Cushing. So, and I think you kind of alluded to that. So maybe we just make it simple. Let's add it back in. You don't have to do scoring, but it adds in that layer of let's at least just look at the numbers one more time for the council. So I would suggest for this to go to council, we include that step, and we can debate whether it's necessary and strike it if people want to strike it. But I think just including it for now, I think would be good. So I would like to motion to amend what's in front of us to include an extra step for the finance committee to review.
In there. I didn't take it out.
Okay.
I will second that, John, and I wasn't even trying to get you to a 6, so imagine what could have happened if I.
Yeah. Well, I think the discussion, I think it's just, it's good to take another eye at it, even though I would hope we do it expediently, because again, I don't want to delay these projects from moving forward. And I think if we know 3 months in advance, I think that was the request, that we have to know that they have to at least submit something, so that way it doesn't impact when they're going forward for state funding, which I think was an issue that we had with one
Right.
project. Like,
Right.
then we can actually plan to make sure we're not slowing them down.
The only other option I could think of is that what you could do is say, Housing Alliance, send us your recommendations directly to finance instead of doing a separate workshop with the council.
I mean, I think wouldn't it make sense to just let the finance committee take the first pass at it?
Mm.
And one of my understandings of our role is to sort of vet things in the same way, for example, that we expect town staff to vet stuff, recent example, licenses and the like, and bring it to us to say, okay, now we can discuss the values issues around this, consistency with goals, this, that, and the other thing. And if the council chooses to backtrack and say, well, wait a minute, we think that we're giving away too much here, or that sort of thing, that would be their prerogative. But I think that, to my mind, it would come out of a meeting of the finance committee saying, we think that this is a good use of our tax incentives and it makes sense for us to do. And it is responsible. After that, council, you can debate it. And I would envision somebody saying, well, affordable to who? Okay, who are we providing housing for? Does it make a meaningful contribution? Those are kinds of questions that I think are correctly at the council level.
So the recommendation is modify this to have Housing Alliance provide their information directly to finance, for finance to then vet the financials before it goes to council.
Yes.
I have no problem with that. Okay, so if we make those adjustments, would we be comfortable moving this with those adjustments to the council for action?
So one more thing I want to point out, because Tom reminded me I had two issues that I wanted to make sure I highlighted for you. When it calls for that third-party financial analysis, I did provide a waiver that the finance committee could give to say, you have to do the analysis, but it doesn't have to be a third party. Like if you have somebody who already has on their staff, people who do financial analysis, but it's up to you guys. It's just a possibility to waive that.
I think it's good to keep it.
That seems reasonable.
Okay.
Right, so with that, I would like to motion that with the adjustments based on today's conversation, that we move this to council for a first reading.
Okay.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous, right.
All right.
Next, Karen, awesome job.
Yeah,
and
sure.
work on this. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Next is, again, more of a formality. I just wanted us to move the items for our fiscal policy that we have worked on to the council as well for action. So we have that in the packet. So are there any questions, comments on what's in front of us? I did notice on this again. This one.
One of the paragraphs, the rate, where it says, once the town achieves unassigned,
Yeah,
that should read 16.67. We lost the 16.
Yeah.
Somewhere, but that's consistent with the next paragraph down that says in excess. So
Yeah.
that's our target.
Okay, sorry for that oversight. Yep.
I guess I'm really good at editing things.
You are.
I have trouble with red lines. Yeah, yeah. While we're talking about it, we made one other minor adjustment in the section where we talk about high grade or above. We added a definitions reference. You need to go up on that one. Yeah, right there. We added a definitions reference because we already had definitions in the fiscal policy. So if we go down to the bottom real quick, there's our definition. I've described how each rating agency rates their scale, and that then directly references the table where you delineate between investment and junk. So it gives the measurable credence to the policy.
Yeah. Great. Any questions for Norm? So I would like to move that we advance this as amended to the council.
No, second.
Any discussion? No? All those in favor? Right.
As a practical matter, these will come to council, I believe, on November 6th. We're just not gonna have time to turn it
Okay.
around for next week.
Good. So the new counselors.
So we'll start with the existing council, but they'll span into the new
Okay.
council. Actually, let me think. They're both policies, so they're kind of once and done. This council,
Okay.
so they don't, unless you want it, they're just, it's not a two-step process.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure if it
It would be nice for this council to tie it up in a neat little bow.
all right. With that, is there anybody in the public who would like to comment? I don't see anyone. Nope. All right. So before we adjourn, I just want to thank Karen and Dawn for being awesome committee members this year, and the staff for all of your support. Nick, everything you did for the reval. Karen, you've been amazing working with us on the modeling. Norm, everything you've done to help us do budget and everything. So it has been a big pleasure serving on this committee. And I've really enjoyed partnering with you guys, and maybe I'll be back next year. I don't know. We'll see.
Is this our last one, John?
This is our last one.
Um,
Don, anything you want to say?
Well, I would hope that, I've been, I guess, not wanting to create any real pressure around the request for clearer budget numbers and that process. And I'm not sure what happens now, whether that falls by the wayside and has to be started in the next finance committee. I would hope not, but that is still, I think, important, and I'd like to see that rise to the top of whoever is in the next finance committee.
Maybe we capture that as unfinished business for consideration for the next finance committee's first agenda, to continue that conversation, which I think will be timely, given it's never too early to start thinking about budget and what we want to do differently. So that would be my suggestion, is just, we can recommend that is like a agenda item for the first one.
Yeah, and Counselor, that notion is not lost on staff. We met with you. We I think have a pretty good sense of, from your perspective, what you're looking for. And certainly we'll be doing our best to meet that expectation with the budget next year. We may want to circle back to you and get your feedback on some of the early product we put together, but we have it.
Thanks, and I would appreciate that.
Karen? Anything?
Thank you for your leadership. If I'm on finance next year, I did not get what I wanted, but maybe I'll be here, maybe I won't. But thank you to staff and to John and Don. It's been quite the educational experience the last 2 years. Thanks.
All right, with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
All in favor? All
bye.
right, thanks, everyone. Bye.